Hello, my name is Jungmi Lee. First of all, I'd like to express my gratitude towards the organizing committee for giving me this great opportunity to present my work at the 22nd Seoul International Conference on Generative Grammar. The, the title of today's talk is Temporal Constraint on the Meaning of Modalized Sentences. I'd first like to talk about Charles Hockett's list of design features that distinguish human languages from animal communication, such as arbitrariness, learnability, and creativity. One of the features is displacement, and Kai von Fintel says that modality and temporality are at the heart of displacement. Because unlike animal communication, human languages are not restricted to expressing what is happening here at this moment. We can talk about what happened in the past or what will happen in the future, and also we can describe some hypothetical situations. Modality and temporality are the linguistic categories that are used to express such state of affairs beyond the actual here and now. More specifically, modality is the category that expresses the possibility or necessity of the proposition expressed. And it can be expressed in all languages by various expressions such as auxiliary verbs, adverbs, nouns, and adjectives. And temporal meanings are also expressible in all languages, typically by tense and aspect, and also by time adverbs and temporal connectives. Today, I'm gonna talk about meanings of modals, focusing on how to formalize its meaning in terms of Crutcher's modal theory, and then I will briefly introduce previous work on the interactions between temporality and modality across languages. And also, I will talk about Korean modal sentences, particularly focusing on the meaning of modal sentence realized with the bound noun su. In terms of the meaning of modals, there are two subcategories of modality. Epistemic modals are concerned with the speaker's knowledge, and root modals pertains to circumstantial facts such as rules and desires, goals and ability. The relevant examples are given in 3 and 4. When a sentence contains a modal expression, it gives rise to a different meaning from its counterpart without a modal. For example, the non-modal sentence in 5 is construed as John having the flu in the actual word, but in 6 and 7, with the epistemic modals might and must, the same presacient proposition is not asserted to be true in the actual word. 6 means that the proposition such that John has the flu is possibly true in view of what is known, and 7 means that the presacient proposition is necessarily true in view of what is known. These different meanings of modalized sentences are represented in terms of quantificational force and the notion of accessible words. Following the traditional modal logic in formal semantics, we analyze necessity modals like must as universal quantification over accessible words, and possibility modals like may as existential quantification over accessible words. And then how do we determine the accessible words of a modal sentence? In Crutcher's theory, which is the so-called standard theory of modality in formal semantics, accessible words are determined by two conversational backgrounds. Modal base, first of all, modal base gives a set of accessible words to a modal sentence, and ordering source imposes an ordering among the words determined by the modal base. For example, in number 8, John must have the flu. Here we have the modal base in 8A and the ordering source, doxastic and stereotypical ordering source in 8B. And by means of these two conversational backgrounds, what the modalized sentence in 8, John must have the flu, says that what the sentence means is that among the words in which all of the facts that the speaker knows hold, his expectations rank most highly those words in which John has the flu. In terms of the meaning of must, we know that it induces a root reading as well, as you can see in 9b. So John must go to jail, and this sentence receives a root interpretation. Like the English modal auxiliary verb must, a single modal element can give rise to a range of modal readings across languages. Then the question arises as to whether such modals are lexically ambiguous or not. In Crutcher's theory, such modals are not analyzed as being lexically ambiguous. Their different modal flavors are analyzed as being contextually determined by conversational backgrounds. That is, 10A receives an epistemic reading due to the epistemic modal base and the doxastic stereotypical ordering source, and 10B, John must go to jail, this sentence receives a root reading due to the circumstantial modal base and the deontic ordering source. 11, the example in 11 illustrate the circumstantial modal base and the deontic ordering source, and with these conversational backgrounds, 11 says that among the words in which all of the circumstantial facts hold, the relevant rules rank most highly those words in which John goes to jail. Now, the formalized meanings of modalized sentences are given from 13 to 15, which differs from the meaning of a non-modal sentence in 12. 12 says that the present proposition, John has the flu, is true at the utterance time now and in the actual word. But from 13 to 15, the present proposition is true at W prime, which is determined by the modal base and the ordering source. The modal might differs from must in that it induces an existential quantification, while must induces a universal quantification. And the two modal flavors available with must are contextually determined by different modal base and ordering source. We've seen that epistemics and root are two subcategories of modals and how they are analyzed in Crutcher's theory. In the literature, epistemics and root are known to exhibit a different pattern in terms of their interaction with tense and aspect. For example, consider Cinque's hierarchy of functional heads, which was proposed on the basis of the linear order of adverbs in languages like Italian and French. So 16 illustrated the hierarchy with English adverbs, and this hierarchy has been supported from other languages as well. It is noteworthy that epistemics and roots occupy different syntactic positions in Cinque's hierarchy, as shown in 17. And along the same line, some authors proposed a syntactic analysis according to which epistemics take TP complement while roots take VP complements. The literature on modality has also noted that epistemics scope over tense, while roots occur within the scope of tense. It was Kondraty who first noted that the pattern of interactions of modals with tense and aspect is more complicated than previously known, with examples like 18 containing the English modal might, uh, she shows that the sentence John might have won the game is available with two different modal readings. One is an epistemic reading and the other is a root reading. And crucially, she observes that the two modal readings differ in their temporal profiles. When it receives an epistemic reading, it means, given what is known to me now, it is possible that John won the game. In contrast, when it receives a root reading, it means, given John's circumstances then, it was metaphysically possible for the world to develop in such a way that John would win the game. In order to capture these different temporal meanings, Kondratiev introduces the notions of temporal perspective and temporal orientation. Temporal perspective is the time at which a modal's conversational background is evaluated, and temporal orientation is the relation between a modal's TP at the time of the presacient eventuality. According to these definitions, the epistemic reading in 18a arises from the present TP and the past TO, because epistemic modal base is evaluated at the utterance time, as indicated by this part, the underlined part, and the presacient event of John's winning the game is interpreted as occurring in the past. In contrast, the root reading in number 18b here arises from the past TP and the future TO. Because the circumstantial modal base is evaluated in the past and the presacient event is construed as occurring in the future. While Kondratiev shows these patterns of temporal modal interactions with the English sentence containing might, in recent work by Ruhlman and Matheson, they argue that a more extensive combination of TPs and TOs are observed across languages. Drawing data from languages like Dutch, English, and Gixan and Lillois-Salish, they show that circumstantial modal base is restricted to future tier readings, but epistemic modal base is not temporally constrained, but all the combinations of TPs and TOs are possible with it. On the basis of this discussion about the modal temporal interaction, what follows, I will show how the epistemic and root readings arise from a Korean modal sentence and how they can be computationally analyzed. This is a table provided by Moon in her dissertation. It summarizes periphrastic modal expressions in Korean. Among these expressions, we have ulsuit, ulsuit. Ulsuit is available with three different modal readings, as shown in 19. The sentence 좌니 그 탁자를 옮길 수 있다. So this sentence is available with the epistemic reading and two root readings. One is the dynamic reading about John's ability, and the other is priority reading concerning permission. In this work, I focus on the fact that the modal readings of the Su construction are affected by temporal elements, as you can see from 20 to 22. First, 20 illustrates that the root readings are not available with dative predicates such as 바쁘, and the Su sentences in 21 and 22 contain progressive aspects 고잇 and past tense 엇, respectively. And these two examples cannot receive the root readings either. In the literature, the modal readings of a Su sentence have been accounted for in terms of structural ambiguity and lexical ambiguity. In the former approach, a Su construction is analyzed as having two separate syntactic structures, each of which gives rise to an epistemic and or a non-epistemic modal reading. And in the latter approach, a Su construction is analyzed as containing a modal element that lexically specifies distinct modal meanings. For example, in the structure ambiguity analysis, Ha postulates two separate structures for Su sentences in terms of Tsuzuoka's analysis of Japanese existential constructions, as you can see in 23. He argues that epistemic modals occur in absolute existential constructions in 23A, and the root modals occur in possessive existential constructions in 23B. In 23A, the precopular is analyzed as a gapless nominal complement. The CP that contains all the arguments of the embedded predicate is taken as a complement by the bound noun Su. In contrast, in 23B, Su combines with a spectral phrase, which has the nominal suffix U as its head, and this spectral phrase contains a big pro whose controller occurs in the specifier position of a possessive phrase. Some other syntactic structures have been proposed in the literature, but all the syntactic analysis cannot account for why non-epistemic readings are not available with a Su construction containing past tense and a stative predicate or progressive aspect, while its corresponding Su construction with the present tense and event predicate or non-progressive aspect can receive non-epistemic readings. The other approach to the modal readings of the Su construction is to analyze the Su construction as containing a modal meaning that is lexically ambiguous. For example, Moon proposes the three separate lexical entries of ul-su-it from a formal semantic perspective as shown in 24. The key part of her analysis is the choosing function, which is defined in terms of the diversity requirement and the agentivity requirement. Encoded in the lexical meaning of the ability su-it and the permission ul-su-it, but not in the epistemic ul-su-it. Moon accounts for the Su sentences with past tense in terms of the diversity requirement, and those with stative predicates in terms of the agentivity requirement. According to Moon, the Su sentences with the stative predicate are unavailable with non-epistemic readings because they cannot occur with an agentive subject. The case with the progressive aspect has not been addressed in her work, but it should be noted that the agentivity condition cannot be applied to it because the progressive must occur with an eventive predicate, which allows for an agentive subject, as in the Su sentence, 철수가 그 특제로 옮길 수 있다. 옮기고 있을 수 있다. So I argue that the fact that the lexical encoded or the grammatical encoded statives are unavailable with non-epistemic readings in a Su sentence should be taken to indicate that the non-epistemic readings are temporally constrained rather than restricted by another constraint, such as the agentivity condition. In the proposed analysis, I extend the empirical coverage of the Su construction to those containing progressive, the progressive aspect, such as 21, and I provide a uniform analysis of the Su examples with past tense, the stative predicate, and progressive aspect. In the proposed analysis, I first illustrate how a Su construction is temporally interpreted in terms of Kondratgy's notions of temporal perspective and temporal orientation. And I compositionally analyze the meaning contributions of tense and aspect in Korean and show how the temporary readings of the Su sentences with past tense and the stated predicate and the progressive aspect are compositionally derived. And on the basis of the proposed compositional analysis, I argue that their root readings, non-epistemic readings, are pragmatically ruled out due to the independently motivated temporal constraint on the modal basis. I provide empirical generalizations about the temporal interpretations of a Su sentence. First, in terms of temporal perspective, they are determined by matrix clause tense. In diagnostics, I utilize time adverbs such as 지금 and the adverb 보, which I think is compatible with both epistemic and root readings of the Su sentence. 26 illustrates that the matrix clause predicate should be realized with present tense for the presentative interpretation. In contrast, matrix clause past tense is necessary for the passive interpretation of a Su construction, as illustrated in 27. TOs in the Su construction are constrained by the tense and aspect in the adnominal clause. Particularly, the stativity of predicates affect the TO interpretation by means of its interaction with tense. If the Su construction embeds an eventive predicate, the embedded past tense induces a past TO interpretation, as illustrated in 28 and 29. So in 28, 지금 보니 좌니 어제 그 탁자를 옮겼을 수 있다. And in 29, 어제 보니 좌니 그저께 그 탁자를 옮겼을 수 있었다. Okay. If the eventive predicate occurs with present tense, it gives rise to a future TO interpretation, as illustrated in 30 and 31. So in 30, 지금 보니 조안이 내일 그 탁자를 옮길 수 있다. In 31, 그저께 보니 조안이 어제 그 탁자를 옮길 수 있었다. 32 and 33 contain the progressive aspect with present tense, and they can receive both the present TO interpretation and the future TO interpretation. So in 32, 지금 보니 좌니 지금 내일 그 탁자를 옮기고 있을 수 있다. And 33, 어제 보니 좌니 어제 혹은 내일 그 탁자를 옮기고 있을 수 있다. When the Su construction contains a stative predicate in its nominal clause, embedded past tense results in a past TO interpretation, as illustrated in 34 and 35. 34, 지금 보니 좌니 어제 바빴을 수 있다. In 35, 어제 보니 좌니 그저께 바빴을 수 있다. And the embedded present tense with stated predicate constrains the TO to the non-passive time of the TP, as illustrated in 36 and 37. So in 36, 지금 보니 좌니 지금 바쁠 수 있다. Or 지금 보니 좌니 내일 바쁠 수 있다. In 37, 어제 보니 좌니 어제 바쁠 수 있었다. 어제 보니 좌니 내일 바쁠 수 있다. This table summarizes the empirical patterns that we've seen so far. Considering the stativity of the predicate and occurrence of predicate progressive aspect and tense realizations in both clauses, the temporal reading and the modal reading are closely related. More specifically, non-epistemic modal readings are available if and only if the TO is restricted to future times. Here. This contrasts with epistemic readings that are available with all the combinations of TPs and TOs. In the proposed analysis, I compositionally analyzed the meaning contributions of Korean tenses and lexical and grammatical aspects. I utilized Reichenbach's terms for temporal reference, trans time and event time and reference time. Aspect constrains the temporal location of event time with respect to reference time. 38A contains the eventive predicate, 그 탁자를 옮기, and past tense ought, and 38B occurs with progressive go-it as well as past tense. 39 is realized with stative predicate 바쁘 and past tense ought. And as you can see in 39B, progressive aspect cannot occur with the stative predicate. In these examples, reference time is constrained by the time adverb 어제, yesterday, but its exact temporal location is contextually determined. That is the time at which the speaker met John in the library yesterday. 38A has a perfective reading, according to which the event of John's moving the table has a culmination point within the reference time. By contrast, 39A receives an imperfective interpretation, which means the described state has no change within the reference time, but it holds at the larger interval, including the reference time. The imperfective reading is available with eventive predicates as well if they occur with the progressive go-it, as in 38B. Just like the imperfective reading arises from progressive aspect, I assume that the perfective reading meaning of examples like 38A arises from a perfective aspect, which is phonologically null. Also, as we have seen in 39, stative predicates cannot occur with the progressive go-it, but they have an imperfective meaning by themselves. Analyze the imperfective meaning as being lexically encoded in the meaning of stative predicates, as you can see here, in this part. Here, the T prime, which is the event time of being busy, holds at the larger interval than the reference time T. This imperfective meaning is specified in the lexical meaning of progressive aspect as well, while the reversed inclusion relation is specified in the lexical here. The reversed inclusion relation is specified in the lexical entry of a perfective aspect. Tense is responsible for the temporal location of the reference time with respect to the utterance time in a matrix clause or the reference time of a matrix clause in an embedded clause. I follow dynamic semantic theories of temporal interpretation and assume that the reference time is not existentially bound, but its exact temporal location is contextually determined, as we've already seen from examples like 38 and 39. The lexical entries of past and present tense are given in 42 in terms of a precedence relation. In 42A, past tense allocates T prime, which denotes reference time, prior to T, which denotes the utterance time in a matrix clause or the reference time of a matrix clause in an embedded clause. And also, as we've seen in the preceding sections, Korean present tense has a different temporal meaning depending on the stativity of the present. I reflect this in the translation of present tense. It has a non-past temporal reference with a stative untensed sentence radical and a future temporal reference with an eventive untensed sentence radical. I analyze Su as encoding modal meaning, but I do not postulate separate lexical entries for its possible modal flavors, such as epistemic and dynamic and priority readings, following the basic assumption in Crutcher's theory, such that conversational backgrounds are contextually determined and thus no lexical ambiguity is assumed. The translation of Su is given in 43, and it says that among the words in which all of the facts given by the modal base hold, the words most highly ranked by the ordering source are the ones in which the present proposition is true. Okay. The syntactic and semantic derivation of the two sentences are provided in figures from 1 to 4. Assuming the simple functional application, given here, yeah. So given the finally calculated truth conditional meanings of the sentences, modal base and the ordering sources are contextually determined, and some temporal meanings are pragmatically constrained. Following Roman and Matheson, I assume that the diversity condition adopted from Kondraty temporarily constrained the circumstantial modal base to descriptions of future eventualities. And I present a uniform explanation about the unavailability of the non-epistemic readings with a stated predicate, progressive aspect, and past tense in a SU construction in terms of the violation of diversity condition. In contrast, I argue that there is not such a temporal constraint on the epistemic modal base, and thus all the TP and TO combinations are allowed for epistemic readings in the SU construction. Kondraty's diversity condition is given in 44, according to which there should be at least one word in which a pre-adjacent proposition is true and another word in which it is false. Kondraty argues that in English sentences like 18b, a root reading is available only with the description of a future eventuality, since the truth value of its pre-adjacent proposition is not yet settled to be true or false. Conversely, with the past or present eventuality, its pre-adjacent proposition is metaphysically settled at the time of temporal perspective, and thus the root reading is pragmatically ruled out. Ruhlmann and Matheson show that the same TO restrictions are extensively observed with circumstantial modals in other languages, and they claim that the diversity condition suffices to account for their TO restrictions. I argue that the non-epistemic readings with non-future TOs are excluded in the Korean SU construction for the same reason. Namely, when a modal utterance with SU is contextually construed as involving a circumstantial modal base, the dynamic ability and the priority permission readings can arise if and only if the diversity condition is not violated by non-future TOs. This explains why the non-epistemic reading is available with 19 simple SU sentence in 19, but not with the SU sentences realized with stated predicates, progressive aspect, and past tense. This is because they all violate the diversity condition. More specifically, 20 and 21 with stated predicates and progressive aspects respectively constrained the TO to be in the non-past time of the TP, and 22 with the past tense receives the past TO interpretations, again violating the diversity condition. So in these examples, the non-epistemic readings are all pragmatically ruled out. It's worthwhile to note that there is no temporal constraint on the epistemic modal base, unlike the circumstantial modal base. This is because when we utter an epistemically modalized sentence to describe a past or a present eventuality, its pre-adjacent proposition can still be true or false. In other words, no TO restrictions such as the diversity condition are imposed on the epistemic modal base. However, some researchers like von Fintel and Gillis argue that a past TP interpretation is available in natural language sentences. Von Fintel and Gillis, they argue that 46, there might have been ice cream in the fridge. This sentence can be construed as expressing the speaker's past epistemic perspective on the possibility of the pre-adjacent proposition. In line with von Fintel and Gilles' view, Ruhlmann and Matheson developed a theory of modal-temporal interaction, according to which there is no grammatical TP restriction on epistemic modal base. They support their this empirical pattern drawing data in languages like Dutch, where TP is overtly expressed by tense markings on epistemic modals. It's interesting that the Korean Sioux construction exhibit the analogous pattern as Dutch modal constructions. The TP interpretation is determined by tense realized with modals in Dutch and by TES scoping over the modal Sioux in Korean. Given this parallel pattern, I argue that the empirical facts observed with the Sioux construction provides further support for Ruhlmann and Matheson's claim that there should be no grammatical restriction on the past TP epistemic readings, but all the combinations of TPs and TOs should be allowed for. These empirical facts have theoretical implications in previous analysis like Chinke's hierarchy, where epistemic modals scope over tense and aspect as well as root modals. In today's talk, I investigated the interaction between modality and temporality, focusing on the temporal and modal reading of Korean Sioux sentence. I accounted for the empirical findings on the interaction in terms of the pragmatically oriented temporal constraint on the modal basis, such as the diversity condition on the circumstantial modal base. Also, I empirically supported von Fintel and Gilles' and Ruhlmann and Matheson's claims that the epistemic modal base is not temporally constrained. Okay, thank you for listening. I'm looking forward to talking about the proposal in more details during the Q&A session next week. Thank you.